Chapter 26. Flower Petals in France. Sim, Allie, and Chris approached the gates of Lyon to see the city guards interrogating travelers seeking to cross the stone bridge into the city. The guards kept the bridge blocked, turning people away and checking wooden carts. Chris stopped, hesitating to move any further.
What's wrong?
Asked Allie to Chris, stopping at his side.
They've closed the city,
said Sim.
They're trying to stop it from spreading.
Yes, I am not permitted to enter, even when the gates are open. My family's reputation stretches from here to Paris,
said Chris.
What do we do then? Could we just try another entrance?
Asked Allie, looking around for another bridge to cross.
No, all the other gates are closed as well. Amelie must have been turned away, unless she had helped and found a way to get in,
replied Chris. Sim watched the guards push a woman away, despite her heart-rending cries for them to let her cross. The woman turned back and pounded at the guard's chest plate, screaming in agony.
We should search somewhere else. There is no way Amelie could have made it inside,
muttered Chris, watching the guards as they dragged the woman away and threw her onto the street. A horse brushed its nose against Sim's shoulder. Chris and Allie noticed Sim stumble forward. They looked back to see the horse, which pulled a wooden cart with a man sitting at the front. The man's face was covered by his brown cloak. He looked down at them with a pair of pale blue eyes.
Need a ride into town?
Asked the man with seemingly foreign tone of voice.
The city's closed,
said Chris, pointing to the gates.
Nonsense. The
man hopped down from his cart and walked around to the back.
Not for merchants carrying supplies. I heard someone mention a delicate flower. One which goes by the name of Amelie. You friends of hers?
You've seen Lady Amelie?
Chris asked.
Yeah, sweet woman. She bargained with me to help her inside. I told her I'd be delighted, for free even, as long as she continued to help others before herself,
replied the merchant. Sim gave the mystery merchant a shrewd stare, recalling the pair of eyes behind the cowl. The man winked at him as their eyes crossed paths. Allie followed the merchant to the back of his cart, noticing that the back was full of long lengths of cut lumber. The merchant lifted a set of boards, exposing a large hole in the center, big enough to fit 3 people.
Climb in,
he said to all of them.
But we have nothing to give you in return,
said Allie.
I'll give you the same deal. Help Amelie, and we'll call it even.
The merchant smiled under his hood and cowl. Allie shrugged. She climbed up onto the back of the cart and lay down with her back on the floor. Chris hopped in and laid down next to her. Allie noticed Chris swallow with a look of nervousness and discomfort. His face turned bright red as he looked away from her. Sim stopped at the back of the cart and looked at the merchant's pale blue eyes again.
Hop in, kid,
the merchant said, gesturing with his head toward the back of the cart. Sim climbed up and noticed Chris lying next to Allie, his cheeks red and eyes averted. Sim slipped in between the two of them, forcing Chris to move to the side, separating the two of them with a stern look. The merchant placed the thick boards back over the top of the 3 stowaways until their presence was hidden from casual observers. The trio laid quietly on the bed of the cart, feeling the cart shift as the merchant stepped back up onto the front. They listened carefully to the muffled sound of the merchant's commands to his horse, followed by the crack of the reins. The cart began to shake and rock back and forth on the rocky dirt road, bouncing each of them around into each other.
Well, it's not a pumpkin carriage, but it beats getting arrested,
joked Sim, wincing at the pain of the hard wooden cart jolting his back.
This is no way for a lady to travel,
said Chris. Allie glanced over at Chris. Chris continued to stare up at the boards, not making eye contact with her as she snickered. The cart rolled to a slow stop.
We there?
Shh, whispered Sim. The set of muffled voices could be heard around them.
Bonjour,
hollered the merchant to the guards.
Halt! What is your cargo?
Came a guard's distant call.
Same as before, wood for the pyres. Mill's been at it from dawn until dusk. The dead never seem to rest now, do they? Only fitting we would be left to do all the work, while they enjoy themselves with one final rest,
replied the merchant. Sim rolled his head over to see the guard frown at him through the cracks in the cart. clearly unamused. The guard walked around to the back of the cart. He sifted through the boards at Sim's side, sliding them around over top of the 3 stowaways.
May I ask what you're searching for?
The merchant asked. The guard shifted another board over, exposing Allie's face through a thin crack as his eyes were fixed on the merchant's question.
Rats!
The guard replied. Allie turned her head sideways, hoping her brown hair would make it harder to spot her face. The guard looked back down at the cart.
Rats?
Asked the merchant, his voice full of laughter, once more drawing the guard's attention away.
Of course there's rats. There are rats everywhere. I have 3 humongous rats in the back of this cart, size of people even. Would you like to see them?
The guard shoved the board back into place, obscuring his view of Allie as he glared up at the merchant. He waved the other guards along the bridge away.
Let him through.
Thank you very much, my lords,
replied the driver, clicking his tongue at the horse. Sim could hear the guard grumble as the cart rolled past him. The stowaways could hear the coughs and moans of the city around them as they listened to the rattling in the back of the cart. Sim, Allie, and Chris listened, painfully feeling the cart bumping through the cobblestone streets. A nauseating, powerful, rotting smell filled the small space in the back of the cart. The cart rolled to a stop. They all waited quietly as the merchant hopped off and removed the boards from over top of them.
There we are. The city awaits,
he said, waving from the cart to the open space around them. Allie and Chris hopped out one after the other. Allie scanned the surrounding street to see no other guards waiting nearby.
Thank you very much, sir,
said Allie, directing her attention to the merchant.
You're most welcome, Allie,
he replied, adjusting his cowl around his nose. Allie looked at the merchant for a second, with a confused expression, never recalling a moment when she had told the man her name.
It's worse than I thought,
said Chris, looking around at the sad state of Lyon. Each of the merchant's stalls lining the streets were vacant and abandoned. The stone houses lining the street each looked either deserted or thoroughly ransacked. The city's remaining populace wandered the streets dazed, cold and wet from the rain and mud-filled streets, trying to keep warm.
God truly is forsaking us,
muttered Chris.
Have a little faith, my dear boy,
said the merchant, waiting for Sim to step out of the cart before replacing the boards.
Even in these dark times, what little faith do we have left?
Chris's expression spoke eloquently of deep disquiet.
Well, for starters, I'd speak to that fine man over there about Our Lady.
The merchant pointed to a street doctor standing along the crest of the hill, wearing an eerie white-beaked mask with holes cut out for the eyes.
Thank you,
Allie replied. Chris nudged her on the arm, ushering her along towards the street doctor. Sim hesitated to follow. He looked at the man intently once again. The merchant stared back at him.
Best hurry up, kid. Your time's running out,
the merchant replied, pointing down to Sim's communicator under his sleeve. He turned around and made his way back to the front of his cart, then hopped up into the driver's seat before looking back at Sim one last time. Sim glanced over his shoulder to see Allie and Chris were already walking over toward the doctor.
Catch you later, kid. And remember to keep yourselves covered.
The merchant clicked at the horse. The horse reared its head and walked on, pulling the cart past Sim. Sim watched the merchant drive away, knowing full well who he was. The question in his mind now was whether to tell Otto or to keep the knowledge to himself. Allie and Chris hurried over to the doctor, shouting to the people in the streets, trying to sell his leftover wares. Sim lifted his shirt collar over his nose and hurried to catch up with the two of them.
Excuse me,
asked Allie, shrinking back in response to the doctor's dark, menacing demeanor.
I'm sorry, but I'm out of my zenith powder, and I have no time for bloodletting today,
the doctor replied.
No, sir, you misread our intentions. We are looking for a woman, one with sapphire eyes and dark blonde hair,
asked Chris, keeping his tone firmly polite.
Ah, you mean that bitch who was stealing all of my patients earlier? Why should I tell you?
Chris took a step forward and grabbed the doctor's mask by the beak. He pulled the doctor in close so he could see his eyes through the holes.
I would watch what you say, Leash. You speak like that again and I'll make sure you won't be smelling anything through that nose.
Chris's voice rasped with anger. The doctor glanced down at Chris's family ring worn on his hand as he held on to the doctor's mask.
Now, where is she?
Sim and Allie exchanged approving glances. Chris let go of the doctor's mask. The doctor adjusted the mask back around his face with a stiff posture. He stared at Chris for a moment, then pointed down the street further down the hill.
She went to the south edge of the city, near the docks.
Come on,
said Chris, turning away from the doctor and walking in the direction he was pointing.
Chivalrous,
said Allie as she and Sim followed Chris, leaving the doctor behind them.
Men where I come from could use more of that.
Sim bristled at Allie's comment, as if jealous in a way. Something he hadn't felt about someone in a long time. He started to question his own feelings as new questions began to sprout in his mind. He shoved his concerns aside, knowing he had done enough overthinking for one afternoon. Chris, Allie, and Sim stalked the streets of Lyon further toward the banks of the Rhone River, once more being bombarded by the sickening smell of death permeating through the air. They approached the wooden docks along the river to see a large group of workers unloading boats with cargo moored at the docks. The dock workers kept their distance from one another, trying to avoid contamination from one another and preserve what few workers remained to unload the boats. Guards patrolled each of the docks, checking every boat for rats and opening the many cargo crates being delivered. Allie gazed upriver from the street to see 3 men working tirelessly to finish walling off one of the sides of a waterway entrance into the city with stone and mortar. The city was clearly lingering on its last breath, doing anything and everything possible to stop the spreading sickness, even if it meant forging their own tomb to contain the disease. Chris moved back and forth across the street, impatiently searching through each window of every building for Amelie.
What's she look like?
Asked Sim.
She has blonde hair and is wearing my mother's old gray gown.
Chris replied. Sim and Allie followed Chris's lead, looking in through each window in his wake. House after house appeared empty with no sign of life or Amelie.
Maybe she left?
Asked Allie, looking through the nearest window for any woman with blonde hair.
No, she has to be around here,
Chris insisted, continuing to search. Only 2 houses remained before the street nearest the dock came to an end. Chris stood near the end of the road, expressing his doubt with a worried look. Allie bent over to fix her less than comfortable leather shoe, now taking a toll on her feet. She stood back upright and casually looked in through the nearest window to her right. A woman with blonde hair knelt down next to a man inside, resting in a bed on the floor.
Chris!
Allie hollered, waving him over to her. Chris and Sim hurried over to Allie. They saw the woman through the window who was kneeling down, helping the man sip from a cup in her hand. Chris opened the door and rushed inside the home without hesitation. Allie tried to grab him by the shirt to stop him, but he was too fast. Allie and Sim followed Chris inside, uncomfortably.
Who are you?
Asked the woman, jumping to her feet to face them in surprise.
Is this her?
Asked Sim, looking at the woman. Chris looked at the woman with a disappointed face.
No.
Oh, we're sorry for the intrusion,
said Allie, still hovering near the front door. Sim looked down at the cup the woman was holding. Inside swirled a familiar mixture of green herbs and yellow flower petals. He walked closer and pointed to the cup.
Wait, isn't that the same drink you gave your father, Chris?
Chris snatched the cup out of the woman's hand, looking into it.
Where did you get this?
Asked Chris.
The German woman outside. She was out on the dock no more than an hour ago. She was handing them out freely to everyone. She claimed it would help ease the pains and fever.
The woman replied.
This is Amelie's mixture,
said Chris, looking into the cup.
She searched for these flowers in the forest with me before she left. She said it wouldn't cure my father's illness, but it would help ease the pain.
She must be close. Where did she go?
She left.
Replied the woman. Chris looked at her, handing the cup back.
Left? To where?
Lady Sophie, the countess, found her at the docks just after she gave me a cup for my brother. She said the Count André needed her healing hands.
Where did they go?
To Château Le Demi-Lune.
Chris turned a discouraged face to Sim and Allie.
We have to find a way into there now too, don't we?
Asked Allie. Chris nodded and turned back to the woman.
Sorry to bother you, madame.
Allie, Sim, and Chris walked back out into the wet, muddy streets. A cold chill grew in the air. They walked down to the docks, watching the workers continuing to move their cargo.
So how do we get in?
Asked Sim.
I don't know. You have to be invited to Demi-Lune.
Could we sneak in somehow? Or tell them we are with Amelie?
Allie said, fumbling through ideas.
Perhaps. You'd both have to go without me.
How far is it?
North, at the other end of the city.
Chris and Sim's backs were turned, but Allie saw the squadron of 5 soldiers making their way toward them. Each one was dressed in a fine blue and red tunic, with a lion insignia on the front. They each carried pointed halberds at the ready. At the front strode a bald man with a dark blue cap, holding a scroll of paper in his right hand. He walked with an authoritative posture, his face filled with gloating anticipation. Allie watched the soldiers march closer, feeling in her gut that trouble was about to stroll right up to them.
Guys, I think we're about to have bigger problems,
She said, tapping them both on the shoulders.
Christopher of Matour,
Asked the bald man in a tone of triumph. Chris turned around. Sim and Allie stood ready to run. Chris wasn't. He kept his eyes up, an expression stern, ready to face his accusers.
by order of the Pope Urban II, you and your family have been banished from entering the city of Lyon, unless otherwise permitted. Because of your defiance to this decree, you are to be arrested and put to judgment by His Royal Lordship, the Count of Lyon, André de Avignon,
said the official, reading aloud from the parchment in his hands. 2 soldiers moved forward to grab Chris. Allie leapt into the way. Sim watched her with his brows raised. The soldiers both stopped and looked at the official for instruction.
Move in the name of His Lordship, or you will be taken prisoner as well,
stated the official, his tone sounding far from amused. Allie stood tall, staring them each in the eyes in turn. She knew the crimes they accused Chris of were not his own, feeling it was her duty to protect him from their false justice.
Move! Now!
The official commanded. Allie stood firm. The official gestured to the soldiers with his right hand. They moved up and grabbed Allie by the arm. Chris pulled the bow from his back and notched an arrow in one fluid motion, aiming at the soldier who held Allie by the arm.
Let her go, or this arrow will be the last thing you see as it flies into your skull,
commanded Chris with his aim fixed right between the guard's eyes. Sim felt down in his pockets for something to defend himself with, realizing he was unarmed. All he had was the bag on his shoulders and his wits to protect him. Patting his thighs, he shrugged and raised his fists. The guard let go of Allie. She backed up and stood next to Chris and Sim.
You're outnumbered, boy,
the official spat, motioning the soldiers to lower their halberds into a fighting stance.
I can put an arrow in each one of you before you even cross this dock. My brother stole this bow from a famous archer from the English at the Battle of Sluis. He bestowed it to me, telling me he had killed more French in one day than the pestilence alone. I don't wish to add to its reputation.
A fitting weapon for a treacherous family. Perhaps we will use it to kill all of you then. Take them!
Chris began to back up with Sim and Allie close behind him. They reached the end of the dock beside the rushing river. Chris still held his bow, drawn and pointed at the soldiers, still hoping for a peaceful resolution. Sim scoured the surrounding area for an escape. His eyes stopped on a wooden crane propped near the soldiers with a set of barrels hanging in a net by a single rope over top of them.
Is your aim as good as your boast?
Sim whispered into Chris's ear.
I can shoot a rat from 150 meters.
Chris replied, eyes fixed on the approaching soldiers.
Though I prefer not to kill these rats.
Think you can shoot fish in a barrel?
Whispered Sim, looking up above the soldiers. Chris noticed the crane arm hanging above the soldiers. He lifted his bow in rapid aim, releasing his arrow without brushing the string against his fingers or drawing a breath. The arrow soared toward the crane and brushed the edge of the arrowhead against the net carrying the barrels. The barrels toppled down onto the soldiers in a rumble, forcing two of them to the ground as the others stumbled and fell backward out of the way.
Run!
Shouted Sim, breaking away from the dock with Allie right behind and Chris bringing up the rear.
Get up, you halfwits! After them!
The official's voice echoed behind them, muffled by moans and cracking wood.
Glad that worked.
I was aiming for the rope.
You're a terrible shot in that case.
Shouted Sim.
Only when it counts.
Sim slowed down and banked around an abandoned butcher's shop with Allie and Chris sliding through the mud behind him. Ahead, they could see another group of soldiers marching directly toward them with swords drawn. The street was blocked by houses on either side, with the only exit laying straight ahead of them.
Now what?
Allie turned to Sim. Sim slammed his shoulder into a door cracked open in a shop next to them and ran into the small, uninhabited shop. Chris stopped to turn and shut the door as Allie hurried in and slammed the wooden lock down across it. Sim ran to the back of the shop without slowing his pace. He tucked his head in close to his chest and dove shoulder first through the back window. The wooden frame shattered as he fell out into the muddy street on the other side.
Ow!
Groaned Sim, lying down and holding his shoulder.
That hurt more the second time.
Allie and Chris climbed out through Sim's newly made window exit and picked him up off the ground.
Was that really necessary?
Questioned Allie as all three of them raced down the next street.
Absolutely.
Sim replied, holding his shoulder and wincing as he ran.
I'm starting to think you enjoy hurting yourself.
I must say, your plans aren't very good.
Yelled Chris, trying to keep up.
Neither is your aim.
Sim shouted back with a grin. The trio ran toward the main gate of the city with the soldiers continuing the pursuit not far behind them. 3 guards stood watching the main gate, unaware of the chase, calmly questioning travelers who approached the city. Sim and Allie spotted the same doctor they had spoken to earlier look down the street, noticing them running toward him. The doctor hurried over to the guards at the gate, pointing to the 3 convicts as they approached. The guards broke away from the gate to block their path with their weapons drawn.
Oh, great,
said Sim, stopping next to an empty cart. He grabbed one handle and started to lift.
Grab the other end.
He hollered to Chris as Allie grasped the wood frame in between the handles.
Now push!
Together, the 3 of them pushed the wheeled wooden cart down the street as fast as they could, preparing to ram the doctor and guards head on. Standing directly in the road, the doctor hollered at them to stop while the guards stood in place with their pikes pointed in their direction. They continued to push the cart faster and faster down the sloped dirt road. The guards and doctor stood frozen, watching the cart hurtle toward them.
Let go!
Shouted Sim. They all released their hold at the same time, letting the cart run out of control down the gently sloped road. The doctor and guards jumped frantically out of the way at the last possible moment as the cart crashed into the merchant stalls behind them. Sim, Allie, and Chris ran past the fallen guards. Chris landed a blow to the doctor's face as he rose to his feet. Toppled by his swing's force, the doctor fell back into the mud.
You think he deserved that?
Asked Allie, running along next to Chris.
I do indeed,
replied Chris with a smug grin. Turning into what they thought was another street, the 3 fugitives were suddenly confronted with a dead end. They slid to a stop on the wet, muddy cobblestones. Allie ran into Sim's back, followed by Chris, forcing them all to the ground. Their luck had swiftly run out. The soldiers quickly converged on them, blocking their escape from the alleyway. The official laughed as he approached.
God never seems to favor your family, does he?
The official sneered at the 3 of them. The soldiers picked Sim, Chris, and Allie up off the ground and clasped a pair of irons on each of them.
Well, so much for that plan.
Chris muttered as the soldiers clamped the cuffs around his wrists.
Where should we take them, sir?
Asked one of the soldiers to the official, pushing Allie over toward him.
Demi-lune! Countess Sophia will be the one to decide their fate in the Count's absence,
replied the official. Sim looked over at Chris as the guard roughly pushed him along.
There's our invitation,
Sim whispered. Chris smirked at him.
I take back what I said about you.